She tried to discredit him on live TV. His response? It changed everything. The email arrived late in the day, a brief, formal invitation from the production team of Sunrise Today, one of the most watched morning talk shows in the country. They wanted Malcolm Grant, tech innovator and CEO of Vertex Solutions, to appear on an upcoming segment discussing diversity in corporate leadership. Malcolm had seen this routine before. Mainstream media suddenly spotlighting black entrepreneurs for a quick applause segment before moving on to their next trending headline. But this felt different. Vertex wasn't a small startup looking for airtime. They had just secured a $220 million defense technology contract, outbidding industry giants with decades of government ties. That wasn't luck. It was the result of nearly 20 years of relentless work, late nights, and strategic execution. Still, Malcolm paused before accepting the offer. Something about it unsettled him. His executive assistant, Camille, caught his hesitation immediately. "You sure you want to do this?" she asked. "You know how these shows love to build people up, just so they can tear them back down." Malcolm exhaled, leaning back in his chair. "I'll handle it," he said. "Besides, national coverage is national coverage. Let's see what they throw at me." Camille shook her head but didn't argue further. "Just don't let them drag you into anything," she warned. Malcolm nodded, but deep inside he already knew. If this was a trap, they were playing with the wrong opponent. On the morning of the interview, Malcolm arrived at WZLA Studios in downtown Los Angeles. The green room felt cold and clinical, more like a waiting area in a corporate office than the gateway to national television. A junior producer greeted him with a quick glance and monotone voice. "Mr. Grant, thanks for coming. We'll have you mic'd up in 5. No small talk. No warm-up questions. Just mechanical politeness." As he sat in the makeup chair, a stylist dabbed powder onto his face without a word. On the wall-mounted monitor, Malcolm watched the live broadcast already in progress, a panel discussion on celebrity controversies, followed by a fitness demo, then a teaser slide that made his stomach tighten. Coming up next, the minority tech surge, merit or media hype. Malcolm's jaw tensed. So, this was the angle. If they thought they'd catch him off guard, they were about to be disappointed. Still, he had no idea just how far they'd go to provoke him. The Sunrise Today set was staged to look warm and welcoming. Soft blues and warm gold lighting, with a sleek glass table between the host's chair and the guest seats. Cameras floated silently on cranes, ready to catch every flicker of emotion. Malcolm adjusted his tie as he sat across from Victoria Hale, the show's star anchor, a seasoned journalist known as much for her pointed questions as for her icy composure. She offered him a smile, but there was no warmth behind it. "Malcolm Grant," she began, her voice as smooth and rehearsed as ever. "CEO of Vertex Solutions. Truly a remarkable American success story." Malcolm offered a courteous nod. "Thanks for having me." Victoria leaned forward slightly, shuffling her cue cards with casual flair. "Let's dive right in," she said. "Your company recently secured a $220 million government contract, outperforming some of the most established players in tech. That's quite something." Malcolm recognized the pattern. Step 1. Build him up. Make it seem like they respected his success, just enough to set up the next move. He gave a measured response. "It was a long journey," Malcolm said evenly. "But yeah, we put in the hours. We developed a cybersecurity platform that outperformed every competing bid. Simple as that." Victoria crossed her legs, shifting slightly in her chair. "Some have called it groundbreaking," she said, pausing just long enough for effect. "But others have raised concerns." Malcolm didn't blink. "Concerns?" She picked up one of her cue cards, reading aloud with deliberate precision. "There's been industry chatter suggesting that Vertex may have benefited from federal diversity initiatives. That companies like yours sometimes have an advantage in contract decisions because government agencies want to meet diversity benchmarks. That perhaps this wasn't entirely about being the most qualified, but more about filling a quota. There it was, the real reason they'd booked him. Malcolm let the silence linger before answering, his tone steady but cool. I've heard that line before. It's interesting. When a black CEO wins, suddenly it's special treatment. But when long-established firms, led by the same families for generations, land those same contracts, no one raises an eyebrow. The energy in the studio shifted. Off camera, producers exchanged glances. Victoria didn't back down. So, are you saying race played no role at all in your company's success? Malcolm let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Let me ask you this. When SpaceX won multi-billion-dollar NASA deals, did anyone ask if Elon Musk was selected because he fit a diversity metric? When Blue Origin landed federal contracts, did people wonder if Jeff Bezos got there because of his background? Or, do we only ask those questions when the person sitting in this chair looks like me? Victoria's smile remained fixed, but something cold flickered beneath it. So, you're saying diversity programs don't help? She pressed. Malcolm clasped his hands calmly. Programs like that help level a field that's been tilted for decades. What people forget is, the field was never level to begin with. But Victoria wasn't finished. She had one more card to play. Her smile sharpened, almost predatory now. She glanced down at her notes, then back up with a subtle change in tone, just enough to chill the air. Well, Malcolm, since you brought up the playing field, let's talk about your background, she said. You grew up in Detroit. Single mom, public schools, no Ivy League degree, no deep-pocketed family network. Worked your way up from practically nothing. Inspiring, really. Malcolm nodded slowly, already sensing where she was headed. But here's what some viewers might wonder, she continued, her voice tightening like a wire being pulled. How does someone without elite education, without generational connections, go from a modest neighborhood to beating billion-dollar corporations for government contracts? How exactly does that happen? The unspoken accusation hung heavy in the air. Malcolm tilted his head slightly, his eyes narrowing just a fraction as he measured his words. It's called work, Victoria, he said simply. Some of us didn't grow up with trust funds or country club referrals, so we build from the ground up. Victoria gave a small, polite nod, pretending to listen but already moving to her next point. But surely, you had some help along the way? She pushed. A mentor, a program, something. That gave you a little extra boost? Malcolm exhaled slowly through his nose, keeping his composure. Yeah, he answered, his voice steady. Help came in the form of juggling 3 jobs while finishing my engineering degree and sleeping 4 hours a night for 5 years straight. Help came in the form of sleeping in my office while I built my first software prototype because I couldn't afford rent. Malcolm's voice stayed steady, but the weight behind it filled the room. That's the kind of help I had. Victoria's lips tightened for just a second, subtle but noticeable to anyone watching closely. Behind the cameras, the producers leaned in, their focus locked onto every word. She shuffled her stack of cue cards again, adjusting her posture with that rehearsed professionalism TV anchors master so well. And yet, she said smoothly, there are those who would argue that black entrepreneurs today have more doors open to them than ever before. That initiatives like diversity grants, minority business programs, and government incentives exist specifically to create pathways that didn't exist decades ago. Malcolm leaned forward slightly, elbows resting on his knees, his gaze unwavering. You know what's interesting? He began, his tone calm but charged. Whenever a black business owner succeeds, the first question is always about what programs helped us get there. But no one ever asks which old money bank funded the white-owned startups. No one questions which family legacy got them into Stanford, or which country club buddy cut their first check. Funny how that works. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle across the studio. The reality is, success doesn't come from winning some kind of diversity lottery. People like me had to work twice as hard, be twice as qualified, just to get through the door. The air in the room shifted. The kind of collective stillness that happens when an audience realizes they're witnessing something unscripted. something real. Victoria, to her credit, didn't flinch. She kept her polished anchor smile, the one she used during hardball interviews. But there was a flicker, just a small tell, when she crossed one leg over the other with a little more speed than before. "That's an interesting perspective," she said, her voice smooth as silk but sharp underneath. "But let's touch on another element. Public perception." Turning slightly toward the cameras, she continued, "Malcolm, you present yourself as a self-made success. But let's be honest, there's a narrative around your story that plays well in today's media landscape. Some critics argue that Black entrepreneurs get more press because stories of overcoming struggle are more marketable, while countless white business owners work just as hard and never get the same headlines." Malcolm let out a short, quiet laugh. "Oh, so now we're getting too much attention?" Victoria held her smile, but her shoulders shifted ever so slightly, betraying that she hadn't expected him to laugh. "You're telling me that in a country where over 90% of Fortune 500 CEOs are white men, where the vast majority of venture capital still flows to white-owned startups, the real problem is that entrepreneurs like me are getting too much media coverage?" Victoria tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, regaining her composure. "I'm simply pointing out that in today's climate, some people feel there's pressure to highlight diversity, sometimes at the expense of focusing purely on merit." Malcolm exhaled slowly, shaking his head with a slight smirk. "Ah, merit," he repeated, glancing briefly toward the cameras, then locking eyes with her again. "Tell me something, Victoria. Do you honestly believe that if I wasn't exceptional at what I do, I'd be sitting in this chair right now?" Her lips parted slightly, but before she could respond, he kept going. "You really think I'm sitting here today because I played some diversity card? Or maybe, just maybe, I'm here despite every obstacle designed to shut people like me out?" The weight of his words hung thick in the air. The silence that followed was louder than any question she'd thrown at him so far. But Victoria wasn't ready to retreat, not yet. She had one last angle, the one question the producers had circled in red, the one designed to make him stumble. She inhaled slowly, shifting her position just enough to appear casual. But Malcolm saw the subtle tell, the crack in her polished exterior. She glanced down at her notes once more, then deliberately set the cards aside. This, she wanted to deliver, face to face. "Malcolm," she began, tilting her head with feigned empathy. "It's clear you're passionate about these issues, and I respect that. But let me ask you something." Malcolm gave her the smallest of nods, waiting. "Do you think," she said carefully, pausing just long enough for dramatic effect, "that maybe some of this outrage is overstated? After all, your own story proves that the system isn't quite as impossible for Black entrepreneurs as some people claim." The audacity of it nearly made Malcolm laugh. He felt the heat rise in his chest, but he kept his expression cool. Instead, he let out a soft chuckle, shaking his head in disbelief. "You know what's always interesting," he said, his voice slow and deliberate. "How quick people are to use one success story as evidence that the larger problem doesn't exist." Victoria kept her smile intact, but the flicker in her eyes said otherwise. Malcolm leaned forward again, elbows on his knees, lowering his voice just enough to make everyone lean in. "Let me put it like this," he said. "If one person makes it out of a burning building, do you turn around and say, 'See, the fire wasn't that bad'?" Victoria opened her mouth as if to reply, paused, then pressed her lips together and said nothing. But Malcolm wasn't done. "The fact that I made it here doesn't mean the system isn't broken," he continued. "It just means I fought twice as hard, and endured twice as much, to get through it." The studio grew still. Even the camera operators stopped shifting. Victoria adjusted in her seat, visibly searching for her next move. She took a steadying breath and leaned into her professional anchor tone. "I understand your point," she said, "but let's explore another perspective." She pivoted slightly toward the cameras, her voice adopting that smooth, PR-trained neutrality. "Some people might say, your frustration isn't really about race, but more about resentment toward larger corporations, especially considering your public criticism of major tech firms for their lack of diverse leadership. Malcolm tilted his head to the side, letting her words hang for a second before answering. Resentment? No, he said firmly. Accountability? Absolutely. Victoria's smile wavered for just a fraction of a second. She regrouped quickly. And what would you say, she asked, her tone regaining sharpness, to those who believe that in today's economy, success is based on hard work, not race? Malcolm exhaled slowly through his nose, locking eyes with her without flinching. This was the moment. I'd say, he began, his voice steady and direct, that people love believing in fairy tales, especially when they're the ones who've always benefited from them. A ripple of silence washed over the set, the kind of silence that sticks. But Malcolm didn't pause for long. His voice stayed steady, unwavering. Let's be honest, he said, his tone calm, but cutting through the air like a blade. Black entrepreneurs are still denied business loans at double the rate of our white counterparts. We still get less than 2% of total venture capital funding in this country, and even after we've jumped every hurdle and proved ourselves, we're still asked if we truly earned our place at the table. Victoria sat motionless, staring but not really absorbing. So, let's quit pretending the system's fair, Malcolm continued, his words controlled but unmistakably direct. It's not, and the only people who can't see that are the ones it was designed to protect. The silence that followed felt almost physical, thick, heavy. Not even the control room cut to commercial. Nobody in the booth dared intervene. Everyone knew something real was happening. Victoria shifted in her chair, finally looking visibly unsettled. She parted her lips to respond, but Malcolm wasn't done. This was the moment that would end up flooding social media feeds and news cycles by nightfall. Victoria cleared her throat, casting a desperate glance toward the producers standing just out of frame. But no help was coming. She'd opened this door, now she had to sit in it. Malcolm casually adjusted his watch, letting the weight of the silence stretch just long enough to make people squirm in their seats at home. Then, after a deliberate pause, he leaned back, exhaled, and lowered his voice. You know what the real issue is, he said, softer now, but somehow heavier, more final. Victoria hesitated, reluctant. What? Malcolm didn't blink. The bar isn't set at the same height for everyone. Victoria shifted again, crossing and uncrossing her legs. Meaning? I mean, Malcolm said, a mediocre white man can fail upward in this country, while a brilliant black man has to jump through flaming hoops just to be given a chance. Somewhere off camera, one of the producers cursed under their breath. They all knew. This clip was going viral. Malcolm kept going, his tone still measured but impossible to ignore. A white CEO can bankrupt an entire company, lay off thousands of workers, burn through investor money, and still get offered another executive job at a different firm within months. Meanwhile, a black CEO has a single bad quarter, and suddenly it's treated like proof that we were never ready for leadership in the first place. Victoria opened her mouth again, but Malcolm wasn't finished. And the best part? Malcolm let out a short, dry laugh, shaking his head. When we finally beat the odds and actually make it, people like you sit across from us on national television and ask whether we got here because of some diversity handout. Another wave of silence settled across the studio. Victoria's jaw tightened, a small, almost imperceptible motion, but the cameras caught it. Malcolm leaned forward just a bit. Not aggressive, not angry, just resolute. You wanted to talk about fairness? He asked, his voice low but steady. Then let's start by telling the truth. The room stayed silent, but this time, the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was electric. It was impact. Victoria's expression changed, slightly. The audience wasn't just watching Malcolm anymore. The whole country was. And then Malcolm turned, just enough to face the main camera directly. I know exactly what some of you out there are thinking right now, he said, voice steady, gaze unblinking. Some of you are nodding, because you've lived this, seen this, felt this in your own life. He held the camera's gaze. And some of you, you're sitting there with your arms crossed, frowning, telling yourself none of this is real, that I'm exaggerating, that I'm playing some victim card, that it's all in my head. Malcolm pressed his lips together for just a beat, then delivered the line that would echo across the internet for weeks. But deep down, you know I'm right. The studio was silent. No one breathed. And then came the producer's voice crackling over the loudspeaker, sharp and hurried. All right, we need to cut to a quick commercial break. Victoria forced a strained smile toward the camera. Stay with us. We'll be back with more. After this. The red light on the camera dimmed, but the fallout had already started. By the time Malcolm stood and made his way toward the exit, the energy in the studio felt like static, thick, electric, and impossible to ignore. Within the hour, clips of the exchange had flooded the internet like a tsunami. But the real storm, that was still gathering strength. The footage hit social media like a wrecking ball. Before Malcolm even reached his car, his phone was vibrating nonstop. Missed calls, text alerts, a flood of mentions and tags. His inbox was overflowing. Twitter was ablaze. Malcolm Grant just called out systemic bias live on air. Legendary. This is what we needed to see on national TV. Lead on Truth hits different. Did you see the way he looked straight at the camera and told the country what nobody else dares to say? And while thousands rallied behind him, not everyone was applauding. Oh, great, another millionaire pretending to be a victim. Cry harder, bro. Life's tough for everyone. Stop whining and focus on business instead of activism. Hard work, race baiting. End of story. By midday, every major news outlet had picked it up. Some called him courageous. Others labeled him combative and disrespectful. By lunchtime, Sunrise Today released a carefully worded statement across their platforms. We value thoughtful dialogue and a range of perspectives. While this morning's discussion took an unexpected turn, we stand by our commitment to open and fair conversations. Malcolm read the statement on his phone and let out a dry laugh. Fair. Right. His assistant, Camille, rang him not long after, her voice somewhere between exasperated and amused. Do you have any idea what you've just done? Malcolm rubbed his forehead. Not exactly how I pictured my day going. Well, congrats, she said, half laughing. You're officially the most talked about CEO in the country right now. He didn't answer right away. He already knew what came next. Viral moments never stay just moments. They become battlegrounds. And the next 48 hours, they were about to get complicated. By the following morning, the story had spilled beyond Twitter threads and TikTok reactions. Cable news anchors debated the clip in heated panels. Op-eds poured in from every major media outlet. Fox News, is Malcolm Grant the new face of corporate victimhood? CNN, Malcolm Grant's viral interview, a wake-up call on race and meritocracy. Business Weekly, what the Malcolm Grant incident tells us about bias and success in corporate America. Meanwhile, over at Sunrise Today, Victoria Hale entered full damage control mode. On air the next morning, she delivered a carefully rehearsed follow-up. I want to take a moment to address yesterday's interview with Mr. Grant, she said, voice steady but distant. I have great respect for his accomplishments. But I stand by the questions I asked. Malcolm watched the clip from his office, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Because he knew this conversation was far from over. My job as a journalist is to ask what the audience is thinking. If my questions were uncomfortable, that only proves how necessary they were. Translation: she wasn't backing down. Malcolm sat in his office, watching the broadcast from his tablet, shaking his head in disbelief. Across from him, Camille scrolled through a never-ending stream of emails. You're not going to believe this, she said, glancing up. We've got a flood of new investor inquiries. People want to partner with us. Malcolm let out a dry chuckle. Let me guess. Some of the same folks who wouldn't even return our calls last quarter? Camille shrugged, not bothering to deny it. Controversy sells, apparently. But not all the fallout was positive. A few key clients pulled out of upcoming projects. One major corporate partner suddenly decided to reassess future collaborations. And then came the darker side. The threats. Emails laced with hostility. Voicemails dripping with venom. Even an anonymous, unmarked package left at the front entrance of Vertex headquarters. Inside was nothing but a single sheet of paper, with one bold word typed in all caps. Enough. Camille frowned as she read it. You need to increase your security detail, she said quietly. Malcolm exhaled, pressing his fingers against his temples. None of this surprised him. Every time a black man spoke out too directly, too unapologetically, there was a cost. He'd known that going in. But retreat? That was never on the table. Now he had a choice to make. Let the backlash drown him out, or step fully into this moment and turn the noise into something meaningful. Malcolm sat there for a long minute, staring out over the city skyline through his floor-to-ceiling windows. The past 72 hours had been an emotional hurricane. Praise from strangers, attacks from critics, opportunities popping up, deals falling apart. He thought about that younger version of himself, the kid from Detroit who had scraped for every ounce of progress, the one who watched doors slam shut while others breezed right through. And now, here he was. At the center of a national debate he never asked for, but couldn't ignore. Camille stepped back into the office, her expression unreadable. We just got an offer, she said. Malcolm raised an eyebrow. From who? She placed a folder on his desk. A major network. They want you to do a televised primetime special, an in-depth piece on race, business, and systemic barriers. Malcolm let out a long breath. So, now they want to hear me speak. Camille smirked. Seems like it. Then after a pause, what do you want to do? Malcolm leaned back in his chair, turning the folder over in his hands. He could walk away, let the headlines fade, return to business as usual. Or he could use this platform, not for clout, not for ego, but to finally say the things no one wanted to admit on camera. Flipping through the proposal, he closed it with finality, then looked at Camille. Tell them I'll do it, he said. Her eyes widened. You're sure? He nodded once. Yeah, but on my terms, every single one. If the system was going to shine a spotlight on him, then Malcolm Grant was going to control what that light revealed. His viral interview wasn't just another trending controversy. It had become something bigger, a reckoning. It forced conversations that people in boardrooms and media circles had been dodging for decades. About race, about opportunity, about who gets to climb without question, and who gets questioned every time they climb. Some people started calling him an activist, others labeled him arrogant. Plenty called him right. But one thing was undeniable. Nobody could ignore him anymore. So, what about you? Does real success mean playing by the rules of a broken system? Or does it mean rewriting those rules entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you believe more stories like this need to be told, don't forget to hit subscribe.